Okay.
Okay.
All right. This is an interview of John Weeks, who served in the U.S. Army Air Force, European Theater during World War II. We're doing the interview at the Cambridge Public Library, Cambridge, New York. It is Wednesday, May 22nd, 2002, 9 a.m. The interviewer is Michael Russert. Could you give us your full name, please?
John Gavitt Weeks.
Okay, when and where were you born?
I was born in March 7th, 1922 in Lyons, New York.
Okay, what was your pre-war education?
I went into the Army my junior year from Grove City College in Pennsylvania.
Okay, did you work at all prior to the war?
Well, my father was a farmer, and so I worked there, and also I earned most of my way through college working at the local high school, painting and things like that from the summertime.
Okay. How old were you when Pearl Harbor occurred?
I was 19.
19. How did you hear about Pearl Harbor?
I was playing bridge at college with some fraternity brothers of mine, and we had the radio on and couldn't believe it.
Mm-hmm. What was your reaction to that?
Well, it was interesting. I don't think we had any idea of the significance of what was happening, but as I say, it was just kind of an unbelievable thing. We even wondered if it was a fake or not.
Mm-hmm. When did you decide to enter service?
Well, right away, very soon after that, I would say that day probably, I made my decision.
Mm-hmm. You enlisted then?
Oh, yes.
And you selected the Army Air Corps?
Well, I actually first applied to the Marine Air Force, and they turned me down because of my back teeth don't quite line up right. So then I went to the Navy Air Force, and the same thing. They turned me down, and by that time the Army had relaxed their problems with teeth, and so I was accepted there. However, it's interesting that within 90 days after I went into the Air Force, I received notice from both the Marines and the Navy to report for duty.
Where was your basic training?
Basic training was in Miami Beach, Florida.
Could you tell us about some of your experiences there?
Well, we stayed in one of the luxury hotels along the beach, and it was interesting. It was our first introduction to the war because in the morning when we would get up, there would be smoke on the horizon over the ocean, and we were told that that was from tankers that had been torpedoed the night before by the Germans. And the reason they were able to do that was because they didn't have a blackout in Miami Beach, and so they that highlighted the targets that they were after, and it made it easy for them. Later, that was corrected and there was a blackout.
Okay, what kind of planes did you train in?
Well, at first, my first experience was in Ryan Field in Tucson, Arizona, and I was in a PT-22, which was a 120 horsepower open cockpit plane designed in about 1932, I think, and that was fun. Then we went to basic training, which was in Marana Field in outside of Tucson, Arizona. There we had BT-13s, which was affectionately known as the Vultee vibrator, because it shook so when we were doing acrobatics, particularly in a spin. Then we went on to advanced, which was in Williams Field in Phoenix, Arizona. There we flew the AT-6, which is a wonderful plane, a lot of fun to fly because it was good in acrobatics. From that, we stayed at Williams Field in Phoenix, and we trained in AT-9s, C-45s, B-25s, all twin-engine planes to get us used to handling twin engines. And then we went into the RP-322, which was the British version of the P-38. The difference between their version and our version was that their version was not supercharged, which meant it couldn't go to altitude as much. Now, that was a single-place airplane, so the way it was done was you had to just get in it and go, and it was a tremendous change because we went from about 600 horsepower in the AT-6 to 3,500 horsepower in this RP-322, and we went from 180 miles an hour to 400 miles an hour right off the bat. It was scary. I'll never forget it.
Okay, what unit were you assigned to?
When I went overseas, I was assigned to the 13th Photographic Squadron.
Excuse me, let's go. When did you go overseas?
I went overseas just after D-Day in 1944, and I landed in Glasgow, Scotland, and from there I was assigned to the 13th Photographic Squadron right outside of Oxford, England, in a little field called Mount Farm. We weren't there very long. They transferred us to a British field called Shellgrove, which was only about 3 or 4 miles away, but it was bigger, better, and had better runways.
What did you do with the photographic squadron? What was your mission?
Well, our mission was to photograph bomb damage of the major cities in Germany and France at that time. Also, ground movement of troops and so on. It was a varied mission. We just tried to keep track of what the Germans were doing, and our bombing missions were based on the photographs that we took. Also, the British used a lot of ours. Actually, we worked closely with the British. They were at Benson Field, which was next to ours, and we exchanged photographs because they had a photographic outfit there.
What kind of plane did you fly at that time?
Well, the 13th Squadron flew P-38s, and however, there are 4 squadrons on our field, the 13th, 14th, 22nd, and the 27th. The 14th Squadron flew Spitfires.
They were Americans flying Spitfires?
Well, they were American pilots,
American
but
pilots with a British Spitfire.
With a British Spitfire, yes.
Could you tell us about some of your missions?
Well,
how many missions did you fly?
I flew 19 missions. They were all over the lot. Early on, you had what we call milk runs, and the first mission that I had was with another experienced pilot, and it went to Saint-Nazaire, France, which is on the Atlantic Ocean just south of the Brest Peninsula. That was called a milk run because it was very lightly, it was just a pocket of Germans that we had not cleaned out, and it was very lightly defended, so it was easy target. The worst mission, I think, probably was on Christmas Eve of 1944. During the Battle of the Bulge, if I recall correctly, started about December 11th, and somewhere in there. And the weather was bad, so that we couldn't go over there with any success. until the skies cleared up completely on Christmas Eve, December 24th. During that period of when there was very little air activity, it gave the Germans and the Americans a chance to fix up all their airplanes and so on. And on that one mission, there were 7,000 airplanes in the air. And that was my worst mission because I was jumped by German fighters 5 or 6 times, I think 6 times.
Did you have any kills at all, or did you?
Oh no,
not allowed.
We had we had no guns.
Okay.
No guns at all. Just cameras, and the only defense we had was our speed and our ability as a pilot. We had very heavy losses. The Germans, if they saw one P-38, they pretty well knew that it was a photographic plane, and they'd go after it. Now we had losses so heavy during this period that they sent over P-51s, and we would take missions with 4 P-51s as escort, as a protection for the photographic plane. Sometimes if it was a Black Star priority, which was a major do-or-die type mission, they would send 2 photographic planes with the idea they kind of hoped that one would get back.
What kind of mission would have been a Black Star priority? What do you mean by that?
Well, you know, I'm not sure that I can answer that, other than it would be perhaps an oil refinery, something that at one time ball bearing factories were of high priority. Oil was very, very important. Sometimes a bridge. It would be, it varied. And actually the pilot didn't know the specific, not necessarily know the specific target, but was told to take the area, and it would include that, whatever they were after.
Okay, could you tell us about other missions that you had? How long were you flying? Until what dates? Well,
the last mission I took, I believe, was April 26 of 1945. I think that that may have been the last mission of the war. I'm not sure that. My buddy Tom Vaughn from Texas also took one that day, and I can't remember who took off first and who took off last, or who landed last, and so on and so on. But I believe that they were the 2 last missions of the war. That was a bad one. It was to Prague, Czechoslovakia, and when we got over there, one of the targets was an airfield. And as we went over the airfield, and usually when we took pictures, we were at about 25,000 feet. Now, going in and coming out, my personal tactic was to be much higher than that. I go way up to as high as 39,000 feet. But in that particular mission, as we were going over this airfield, I looked down and I saw 2 fighters taking off from that airfield. The airfield had black marks on it, which meant that it was a jet field. And we were terrified of these jets because they were at least 100 miles an hour faster than we were, and they could go higher, and so on and so on. And so I called them out to my fighters. I had 4 fighters with me. And in a very short time, I realized they were at our altitude, and I could see them in my rearview mirror, which was right up above my head. And so we turned so that they would come at a deflection shot at us, and I told the fighters to ram them. Well, this was not as dramatic as it sounds, because our closing speeds were over 1,000 miles an hour, and to try to hit something. But what I did know was that the ground was listening to our conversations and was advising them what we were saying, and I thought that would scare them. And we did. We came awfully close to them. However, they only made one pass. The lead man, of course, was after me because I was the photographic thing, and he went under me. I could see him very plainly in the cockpit, and he went under me and turned and went down, and that was the last we saw of them there. That was a scary situation, but not critical. On another mission that was interesting was that one of the tactics that I would use, and everybody had their own method of tactics, was that if there was a cloud cover, I would fly just above the tops of the clouds, because if I were attacked, I could just jump into the clouds and get away. They couldn't track you in the clouds. And at one point on this particular mission, there was a single plane off to my right, and it was far enough away I couldn't really tell whether it was a Spitfire, which would mean that it was a reconnaissance plane too, or whether it was a ME-109, which looked very much like a Spitfire at a distance. And I watched very carefully, too carefully, because the next thing I knew, I saw tracer bullets going past my my canopy, and so I looked up in my rearview mirror, which was about 3 inches above your head, and I saw this plane very close to me, firing away, and excuse me, and all of a sudden my mirror disappeared. He had shot it off. Well, I dove into the clouds and got away okay, but that was the only time my plane was hit.
Now, when you went on the Czechoslovakian mission, where was your base?
It was in Oxford, England. That's a long mission, long, long way. We had a range, I would say, of 12 or 1,300 miles. The reason I hesitate on that was because it depends upon what you run into. Usually when you got into combat, you poured on the coal, you went wide open, and of course you used a lot of fuel, which would reduce your range, of course. But generally speaking, I would say 12 or 1,300 miles, and we might squeak out even more than that as far as that's concerned. Gasoline was always a problem coming back. But however, there were emergency fields in England down near the White Cliffs of Dover, which we could land at and refuel. Also, late in the war, there were airfields in Germany and in France too. One of the times that I came back very low on fuel, I ran into a thunderstorm over Holland, and I didn't know whether I was going to make it across the channel or not, but I didn't have much choice because I couldn't very well find a field and land in a thunderstorm. So I went on to a field called Manston, which was a huge square paved field made especially for emergency landings. It was 10,000 feet square, and so you could land in any direction, and you had a lot of runway. And I landed there, at the end of that mission. And when I went to taxi, I put the throttles forward a little bit and both engines quit.
What was your rank in the squadron?
I came out a captain. I was, of course, a lieutenant during most of the war.
Okay. What were your feelings, and how did you feel when you learned about VE Day?
Oh,
Where were you when you?
well, we were at our field in Chalgrove, Oxford, England, and well, I'll tell you, it was the greatest relief I've ever had in my life. And what we had done, I was CEO of the squadron at that time, and I can remember that Sergeant came to me with the idea that we knew it was coming. We just didn't know exactly when. I think we knew probably a week or even more before. And he came to me and wanted to know if it was all right if they went out and bought some beer. And so I said, well, I thought that was a wonderful idea. And so they went out and they bought, I think, 6 barrels. Now, I'm not talking about a little 10-gallon thing. I'm talking about a barrel, 6 barrels of beer. And we brought them in on a 6x6 truck. And I had them put them in the ammunition dump, which was guarded 24 hours a day. And so that it would be ready when we were ready. And also, of course, the British beer was warm, or fairly warm, and the ammunition dump was the coolest place because it was underground. And but when it came, when Churchill made his announcement that the war was over, we sent the trucks down there, and they rolled the beer up on the trucks, and they brought it to the squadron. And by the way, other squadrons had done something similar. They had their own system, and we rolled the kegs, or the barrels, out on top of the bomb shelter that we had, that was elevated and could easily be tapped right there. And you never saw so many drunk guys in your life.
How many were in your squadron during the war?
2,500.
And what was the casualty rate? You said it was...
I really don't know. I really don't know the casualty rate. However, when we got over there, right after D-Day, there were only the full complement of pilots was 25. And when we got over there on D-Day, or after D-Day, there were only 13 pilots in the squadron. And there were only 6 of us, which made only 19, so we were still short. As a matter of fact, Mike, I don't remember ever having 25 pilots in the squadron. There was always a casualty or something that made us short. Not down to 13, but short. Yeah.
Were you in continuous communication with home? Did you write a lot of letters home, receive a lot of mail?
Yes, I tried to. And my mother particularly was very, very good about writing, and we wrote those little V-mails, if you remember those. And that was, but unfortunately, after the war, when my folks died, those letters got lost, and I have no idea what happened. We don't know.
When did you return home?
I didn't return home until May 26, 1946, which was about a year later. I stayed over there, and I flew, I hate to admit this, but I signed up to fly for what at that point was Air Transport Command. multi-engine pilot, so I qualified. And frankly, the reason I did it was I didn't want to go to the Pacific. Had the war up to here, and I was terrified, and I was a nervous wreck, and so I knew that I could stay in Europe so I stayed there for a year. I signed up for a year, and I stayed in Europe for a year.
Were there any celebrations when you arrived home that late after the war? Or?
Well, I was
family celebration.
Oh yes, I was met at the train by my folks and my uncle and aunt, and it was very emotional, of course, and but I think we had a kind of a family gathering. I really don't remember too much, but everybody was very pleased that I was home.
What were your post-war experiences, occupations? Did you finish college?
I went back to college for one day. I went back to Grove City, and I hadn't even signed up yet, but I could get in, I knew. And I was at Lincoln Dormitory, and my roommate was 16 years old and wet behind the ears, and I couldn't stand him. In the first hour, I couldn't stand him. And I just knew, I spent one day there and one night, and I just knew that I would never be able to concentrate on college. So I left there and went up to Lockport, and very fortunately, I got a very physical job with a cotton bleaching plant. And my first job for a long time was to haul bales of cotton like a donkey from the warehouse into and that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I of course had lots of trouble sleeping at that time, and I'll tell you, you haul cotton all day and you sleep. And I stayed there for about a year and a half, and it was a wonderful transition for me. After that, I went to work for I got married and went to work for a box making factory in Newark, New York, and that was near my hometown, and took off from there.
Do you belong to any veterans organizations?
Yes, I belong to American Legion over here. Yes.
Do you have any unit reunions or any kind?
Yes, we had a reunion, the 50th reunion, and we went back to England and went back to Shalgrove, to our old base, and we had a wonderful time. That fellow in that picture I told you was the only survivor beside myself on that particular mission.
Why don't you show us that photograph?
This, I don't know whether you want that.
Yep, hold that right there and I'll zoom right in on it.
All right.
If you want to identify the people in the photo,
well,
you would.
The one on your left is Lieutenant Schultz. The next one is Lieutenant Belt, B-E-L-T, from California. He was the only survivor, beside myself, of this group. The next one was Chick Batson.
Well, you're in the center, correct?
Yes, I'm in the center. The next one was Captain Batson, and the next one was Lieutenant Davidson. As I said, the three did not survive the war.
Okay, I got it.
Okay.
Yep. Did you want to hold up some of those photographs you have over there too?
Oh!
I can get those in.
Well, that is... this is an Eager Beaver cadet. When I first went in the Army as a cadet in Miami Beach, this was taken in Miami Beach. It was a publicity picture. Our local hero has enlisted in the Air Force. Okay?
Okay.
This was a picture of me after a mission, and I don't know what mission, but it must have been in the summertime because I don't have very many fur clothes on, or sheepskin.
Okay.
All right. This was a publicity picture of me when I was made adjutant of the squadron, and I don't remember when, but probably in the fall of 1944, or early 45.
Okay.
And this is a publicity picture of me when I was made commanding officer of the squadron at the age of 22. Right at the end of the war. My job was to deactivate the squadron.
Okay.
All right, we can get those. Now, is there anything else you want to mention that we didn't cover in the interview? How do you think your experiences changed or affected your life?
Oh, tremendously. There's no question about it. And I think it made me a much better person. One of the experiences that I had, Mike, that I didn't mention there, was that at the near the end of the war, I had a mission, and I don't remember where it was, where the destination was, but I was all alone. And on the way back, I ran low on fuel, and I landed at Munich, Germany. And the Munich area had just recently been liberated at that point. And I remember the runway was all bombed out, and I had difficulty landing. They didn't have any aviation fuel there, so I had to spend the night. When I got out of my plane, first person I bumped into was Captain Cook. Now, Captain Cook was head of the military police at Shalgrove, and he had been transferred to Munich to keep order there. And it was kind of a reunion. And he took me in his Jeep downtown to where I was going to spend the night. And by the way, my roommate that night was a Russian. So the conversation was very sparse. But he was a nice guy. There was no problem. But Cook then took me to Dachau concentration camp. And it too had just been liberated. And it was the most shaking experience of my life. We went in, I can remember the first thing that struck me as we went through the gates in his Jeep was the smell. And I vomited right as we went into the gate. And we drove around the compound, and we had to drive very slowly because these people were in such terrible shape they couldn't get out of the way very well. And they would come up and they would touch me on the shoulder and say, "Danke," thank you. And we went to one area where they had dug a trench with a bulldozer. Oh, it must have been 8 feet wide and 100 feet long. And they were pushing bodies into this common grave with a bulldozer, believe it or not. And that was a horrible experience as far as something I will never, ever forget. Very difficult.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your...
Okay, thank you.